There are moments in every person's life when they face intense adversity. They're crucibles that forge who they become as individuals and as leaders. Now more than ever, we need leaders who are called to a higher standard, focused on leaving it better than they found it, and paying it forward to the next generations. Now, let's join Fire Chief Randy Brugman as he speaks with leaders from all walks of life, as he explores and learns from their personal journeys and the crucibles that have forged them into better leaders and better people.
Well, welcome to another episode of the Leadership Crucible podcast. Today, it's an honor for me to have on Burns Hargis. Burns was named the 18th president of Oklahoma State University and the OSU system in December of 2007 and took office March 10, 2008. He retired as president on July 1st of 2021. Burns oversaw one of the nation's most comprehensive land-grant university systems with more than 35,000 students, 7,000 employees, and campuses located in Stillwater, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, and Okmulgee. As president, Hargis enthusiastically united the broad OSU community of students, employees, alumni, and donors behind the bold vision of a modern land-grant university that cuts across disciplines to better prepare students for success. The results have been historic. He guided OSU to record enrollment and record fundraising, with pledges and cash surpassing the $1 billion branding success campaign goal nearly 2 years ahead of schedule. In total, OSU raised more than $2.2 billion in private support and added more than 82,000 new donors during Burns' time as president. OSU's giving has focused on student scholarships, faculty, and other vital resources and programs. Hargis also oversaw a construction boom that transformed the OSU campus to be more competitive in academics and athletics. And most recently, the crescent-shaped business building and spectacular McKnight Center for the Performing Arts are new campus icons. Guided by Hargis's vision, the OSU campus has never looked more beautiful. Hargis and his wife, first cowgirl Ann, were active across campus, interacting regularly with the OSU's diverse student body. Strong proponents of wellness, they led OSU's initiative as America's healthiest campus. They also took OSU's story of success to alumni around the world. He has held several leadership positions related to intercollegiate athletics, serving on the NCAA Football Bowl Championship and Big 12 conference boards. Hargis holds a degree in accounting from Oklahoma State University and in law from the University of Oklahoma. Is the second OSU graduate to lead the university as president. Before being named OSU president, Hargis had a long and distinguished legal and business career. Hargis received the state's highest honor when he was inducted in the Oklahoma Hall of Fame in 2009. He and his wife Ann have 2 children and 3 grandchildren. Well, Burns, thanks for being on the Leadership Crucible podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, it's my pleasure. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Well, Burns, tell us a little bit about where you grew up and how that influenced your path in life.
Well, I had a fairly active growing up. My dad was a geophysicist, and before he got into management, he ran seismograph crews, and so we lived in Canada, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, anywhere you can find oil, and or you think you can find oil. And so they tell me we moved 21 times. I only remember about 5 of them because I was so small but when you're redheaded named Burns, in fact, it's even worse than that. It's Vaden Burns. Vaden was my father's mother's maiden name, and Burns is my mother's maiden name. And going to new schools with a weird name and redheaded was not easy. I would always really dread it. But we lived, the parts that I can remember well are San Antonio and then Lafayette, Louisiana. Talk about a juxtaposition of culture.
Yeah.
And then to Shreveport, Louisiana, which is, they they say Louisiana is really three states. It's the Protestant North, it's the Cajun country, and it's New Orleans. And we lived in all those areas, and then moved to Oklahoma when I was a second semester sophomore. And I finished high school here. And I don't know if it was just my age or where I was in my development, but I just didn't want to move again because everybody thought I'd go to Texas. But all my family, my great grandfather, in fact, was in the first graduating law class at the University of Texas in 1885. And but I just didn't want to move again, and so I wanted to go to school in Oklahoma, and so the choices were OU and OSU, and to be honest, a girlfriend made the difference, not the girlfriend I married, but I decided to go to Oklahoma State University, and which made my dad happy as a University of Texas grad because he didn't like OU, so that was kind of it. I played sports. I at my parents' insistence, I learned to play piano, and I'm glad they were insistent because I've enjoyed it my whole life. So I fairly normal from my sophomore year on.
So it had to be interesting as you moved around. You talked about just experiencing the different cultures and I found that when I've moved around the country, just every place you live has got its own culture. So that had to be impactful.
Yeah, you had to adjust. I'd go to a new school, and invariably the teacher would say, "Well, Vaden," because she read my first name, Vaden, or no, she wouldn't say that. She'd say Vanden or Varden or something, and I tried to correct her, but then I had to say, "But they call me Burns." It was miserable. And of course, the school bully always wants to get on you.
Oh, yeah.
You have to deal with that right away. And but I think it also taught me how to interact with a lot of different cultures and the different people. I can hardly walk through an airport. I don't see somebody I know, because I just was so many places.
Yeah. So your professional life began. You were an attorney and a business person. Tell us a little bit about that part of your life.
Well, when I went to college, I basically went to college so I could get a bachelor's degree and go to law school. You couldn't go to law school without a bachelor's degree. And so what I majored in, I thought was pretty random, but it kind of didn't matter. And I took a course in the humanities, and I really liked it. And my great grandfather, who lived well into my life, who went the first graduate of the University of Texas Law School, he was a poet. He wrote. He just was a real Renaissance kind of guy. And so I got home at Christmas, and I said, "Papa, I think I know what I want to major in." And he said, "What's that?" And I said, "Humanities." And he said, "Burns, the humanities have been the joy of my life, but it's a hobby. You need to learn something that you can make a living at." I said, "Well, I'm going to be a lawyer." And he said, "Well, maybe you are, maybe you aren't." I said, "Well, what do you think I ought to major in?" And he said, "I think you ought to major in accounting." Accounting. But I took an accounting course, and I liked it. I can't believe it, but I did like it. And I ended up getting a degree in accounting. And while I was in law school, I worked at a CPA firm and did taxes. And I realized that I really didn't like to do that. Mm-hmm. And so I got out of law school, and we got ready for the Army. I had my commission. I'd been commissioned second lieutenant, and but I hadn't gotten my orders yet. And so my wife, neither of us had been to Europe, and so we just kind of sold whatever we could, and we just went over and bummed around Europe for 3 months until I finally ran out of money and we needed to come home. And so then I came back, and I practiced law a little bit, and then all of it, there was an option to go into the reserves instead of 2 years of active duty. So I took advantage of that, and so I practiced law and did my monthly drill and then 2 weeks in Fort Polk, which I don't recommend.
So were you what in the military? Were you part of the JAG Corps, or were you?
No, no, actually, when you the time to choose a branch was when I was still in college, and I was always enamored with the James Bond movie, so I decided military intelligence was where I wanted to be, and I got into I was in that branch, but then I decided rather than do that, I might as well get in the finance corps. So I ended up being a finance officer.
Okay. So you were an attorney and an accountant, and so and you were also in several businesses, correct?
Basically, I practiced law doing soup to nuts. I mean, when I was kind of on my own, and then I got into a law firm that did a lot of Chapter 11 bankruptcy reorganization work,
Mm-hmm.
and so I did that, and I also that was primarily we had a bank here in Oklahoma called Penn Square Bank, and it failed in well, I remember exactly July 5th, 1982,
Mm.
and we represented the FDIC. Our firm did. But my senior partner was at the age, he said, I just don't want to take anything on this big, Burns. If you want to do it, do it. But I'm not, I'll advise you, but I'm not going to get involved. And so that basically took up the next 6 or 7 years of my life, is
Mm.
doing nothing but closing banks and suing directors. And it was it was, it was a very difficult time. It was a huge bank closure, and in fact, it caused the closure of Continental Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
And Seafirst was in it, Marine Midland, Michigan National, Chase, and so that just consumed me. And who would have ever thought? Never in my wildest imagination would I have thought I'd be in a role like
Yeah.
that, uh, but I was. And then I always was interested in politics and worked a lot in politics, especially with our senior senator, Henry Bellman. And I was the Republican state ballot security officer. I was the finance chairman uh, and all the rest. And I decided finally that I was going to run for governor. And so I did in 1990. And I probably raised more money per vote that I got than anybody that's ever run for office. Maybe Michael Bloomberg, but so I lost that race. Ran third in the primary, and actually I was a little out of step with what had happened with the Republican Party. It had moved farther to the right
Mm-hmm.
than Henry Bellman was more of a moderate, and I think thought I was more like that. And the issues of abortion had just come up. They really had never been, even though Roe v. Wade was way back in the 70s. It seemed to dominate politics around that time. And but in the course of running and losing, I met a lot of people,
Yeah.
and one of those people is George Kaiser, who is a very successful oil man in Tulsa. But he also bought the failed. Well, it hadn't totally failed. It was called a purchase and assumption, is what we called it in those days. And he bought the bank and asked me to be on the board. And I said, George, I don't want to. I've sued so many directors. I don't want to be a bank board director. This was in 94 or 93, maybe. And he said, no, we're going to keep this one open. And he had good strategy. So, and I think the bank then was about a $2 billion bank. Today it's $50 billion. It's in 7 states. I'm still on the board. I'm not sure why I haven't aged out, but so then I went full time with the bank in 1997, and basically was in charge of the Oklahoma City area, but got involved in acquisitions and all the rest. So I haven't been a lawyer for a long time, although I'm back at my law firm. When I left my law firm, we had 60 lawyers. They have 180 lawyers now.
Wow.
And they were onboarding me, and they said, "This is how our computerized timekeeping system works." And I said, I won't be needing that. I'm not going to be keeping any time. So, but in 2002, I was appointed to the Board of Regents of Oklahoma State University by a classmate of mine who was governor, Frank Keating. And in 2007, our president of Oklahoma State, David Smidley, took the presidency of the University of New Mexico. And one of my, actually, the chair of the search committee, the regent that was chair of the search committee, Doug Burns, leaned over to me at a meeting, and he said, "You really ought to think about this job." And I said, "Doug, you're nuts. I'm not an academic." And he said, "I really think you ought to think about it." And so I did. And I'm not one to stay anywhere too long. And so I've been at the bank for 10 years, and talked to George about it, who had been a state regent, and got some encouragement from various ones, including members of the Board of Regents. And so I put my hat in the ring. But the statute in Oklahoma was that you couldn't go to work for the university for you had to wait a year after you were off the Board of Regents before you could go to work for the university. So that meant I resigned from the Board of Regents in July of 2007. And then I was named the next president in December 7th. And the legislature changed the law to reduce the time to 6 months. So I became president on March 10th of 2008. And I was president till June 30 of 2021.
Well, you did some incredible work there. We'll talk a little bit about that, but it's unusual for a non-academic to take over a university. So, what were some of the challenges as you walked in to take over the university?
Well, you're right. It's not as unusual now. For years, public universities were largely supported by the state. The tuition was relatively modest. But that all began to change in the 2000s, late 90s and early 2000s. And so all of a sudden, fundraising became a real priority for a university president. And a lot of academics have not done much fundraising, if any. They're happy to take it, but they're not. That was the big issue with me, with the faculty, is the fact I was not an academic.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name. He was former president of the University of Texas. Said that he said early on in your tenure as a new president. In fact, the book is a primer for new university presidents. Early on, you'll be visited by the chair of the faculty senate or council, and there you'll be told that faculty morale is at an all-time low. You shouldn't be too alarmed by that, because that's actually the highest faculty morale ever gets. It could fall below that low, but it never goes above it. So I actually didn't find that to be true, actually. But I just assured the academics that I see my job as president is to promote the university, raise money, work with the legislature, and let the provost worry about the academics. I mean, I'm not an academic. I don't have any opinions one way or the other,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not going to get in the way. I'm going to try to find the best provost I can. And fortunately, I had 2 or 3 really good provosts over the years that I was there.
I was just going to ask you, was there anything as you got into to that job that really surprised you?
Oh my goodness, yes. I had not appreciated the importance of process. In academics, at a university, in effect, process trumps outcome. I mean, you can't make a decision without talking to people that are affected by it, and you shouldn't do that anyway, but you really have to go way past what you do in business or in the law, for that matter. Where I learned that lesson the hard way was there was research. My soon became my former research vice president, but my research vice president brought to me a research project where we had a class 3 lab at OSU, and they wanted to bring baboons up for us to inject with anthrax and other agents, and then see how that worked. But then ultimately, you euthanized the baboons. And the interesting part was the baboons came from OU. University of Oklahoma had the baboon colony. And I said at one point, is this an Aggie joke or what? I mean, you're going to bring up OU baboons and we're going to kill them. And so I said, and there was another factor too. I was, and I still am, on the board of the Oklahoma Medical Research Foundation. And the principal investigator on this project, this research project, had been at OMRF. And it was in Boston currently. And in Boston, to do primate research, you have to have a public hearing. And that's why Harvard ended up discontinuing their primate research. So he was looking for a place to actually do the injections and the euthanasia. That's a word. And so I decided, well, in talking to my colleagues at OMRF, I decided, well, we just don't want to do this. It's too controversial. It's going to be a big distraction for us. We're going to have demonstrators all over the place, and we're just not going to do it. Well, that created a firestorm. The academic at Oklahoma State wrote a letter to the editors of the Tulsa World and the Daily Oklahoman about how I was frustrating the research, the war effort, and that our principal patron at Oklahoma State, Boone Pickens' wife, was an animal rights advocate, and they thought she's the one that convinced me to cancel this research. By the way, there was no contract. We hadn't received any money. It was still in that early stage. And I never talked to Madeline Pickens about it. But the mistake I made was not going to the veterinary school, not going to the animal rights committee, not going to the faculty council. I just didn't do the groundwork that I should have done. And I just learned that that's the way it is. And if you want to spend all your time jousting with the faculty, just don't consult them.
Yeah.
And that surprised me.
Yeah.
But lots of other things surprised me as well. But that's a good example of one.
Well, that's true, and I think in any organization, though, right? When you surprise your employees and your constituency, it usually doesn't turn out well.
No, and the other hard thing for a business person to adjust to is in academics, you don't publish until you're sure. Mm-hmm. I mean, you've taken it to the nth degree, and you're absolutely sure. You've put in all the variables. In business, you don't have that luxury.
Yeah.
it was Boone Pickens would always say, you don't want to be one of these guys that goes aim, 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 aim. You got to pull the trigger. You got to fire. But you never have all the information.
Yeah.
You just never sure. I'm sure when you went into fires, I mean, you don't know exactly how everything's going to play out, but you got to go.
Yeah. 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 Good analogy. So, yeah, sometimes, you need to, I think it was Colin Powell said that when you get about 75 or 80% of the information, then you can go ahead and act.
Yeah. 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 You just don't have the luxury of sitting back and letting everything develop. But but on the other side, I think faculty get a bad rap that they don't work hard and that I found that in very few instances that I find that to be true. Yeah. And I actually taught a course and learned how hard that is.
Yeah.
So
let's shift gears here just a little bit. We've talked a little bit in the past about growth mindset. How important is the development of a growth mindset for an individual to be successful?
Well, I think you have to think of yourself in a leadership role. Mm-hmm. If you can't envision that, it's very difficult to take the next step. Mm-hmm. And so you always want to grow. In fact, I'm at the most difficult stage of my life where I really don't have to do anything. And yet you want to grow.
Yeah.
You don't want to just atrophy. And so I've always had my eye on the next prize. What do we do to make life better for everybody? And that's been kind of my North Star is what are you doing to make things better for others?
Yeah. How in your travels, how important is accountability and work ethic for in respect to being successful?
It's critical. I mean, I don't know anybody that's achieved anything. That maybe somebody bought a lottery ticket, but basically, you have to be accountable, and you got to work hard. And you've got to do things. My dad always preached this to me. Get to work before the boss and leave after the boss, mm-hmm. and look for ways that are outside your lane that you can affect. And I think that's always looking around. It's always pondering what can we achieve if we work at it. So I've always, I don't know if my dad just whipped me into that but I've always kind of felt that way. I think my father was he was a strict disciplinarian. Mm-hmm. And when I was 14, I ran away from home, and we lived in Shreveport, Louisiana, and I went to. I decided I was 14. I left with a quarter. I had a T-shirt, jeans on, and a quarter, and I started hitchhiking down to Lafayette because I thought I could get some money in Lafayette. And that you're talking about 200 or 300 miles.
Yeah.
And boy, I was catching those rides right and left, just no problem at all. And finally made it to Lafayette and bought a 15-cent malt. So I was down to a dime. And I went over to a girlfriend's house and knocked on the window, and her gruff dad turned on the lights. And I hightailed it back to a laundromat where I tried to sleep all night. So the next morning I put my dime in the payphone and I called Dad, answered the phone. And I said, Dad, I want to come home. And he said, good, we'd love to have you come home. And I said, well, I don't have any money. I didn't realize that collect called, your dime came back. And so I guess I left that dime there. But I said, well, Dad, I don't have any money. And he said, well, how'd you get down there? And I said, I hitchhiked. And he said, I guess that's how you'll get back. Click. You know, oh my God. And, and I had so much trouble getting rides. I mean, it was so easy going down. It was next possible coming back.
Wow.
But I learned my lesson. I learned my lesson. I never ran away from home again.
Yeah.
That's love. And as he would say, Dad's gone now. But what he would say is, you'd never do that today.
Oh,
I mean,
no.
it's just crazy these days. But that's how you learn a hard lesson.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, we've all been there one way or the other.
Yeah, but anything that really makes a difference is hard.
Yeah.
It's just hard, and that requires a very determined work ethic, and to be accountable.
Yeah. So what, for the next generation of leaders, what challenges do you think they're going to be facing?
Well, I think technology is going to be a major factor going forward. Things move at such a fast pace now, and they're going to just move faster than that. And then you've got the whole AI evolution, and I think being a leader in that environment is very difficult. It's hard to build relationships. It's you just it's hard to lead people you don't know.
Yeah.
And getting to know people and really understand people and having empathy for those people is going to be harder and harder. And those are just key factors, I think, in being an effective leader. So I would, there's some areas, of course, that are beneficial. I mean, the technology we're doing right now.
Yeah.
But I really admire the work that you all are doing in trying to understand and to communicate good principles of leadership.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right, and thank you for that. I think the blending of technology, machine, AI learning as we move forward, or AI applications as we move forward, is going to be a real challenge for this generation to lead, manage, and create an effective workforce with so many influences impacting it. So it's going to be a challenge. So what advice would you give to the next generation as they kind of move through their life journey?
I just think keeping your eyes open to opportunities to make things better wherever you are, whatever you do. It doesn't take some great national initiative. Just every day figure out how you can make something better.
Yeah.
And try to do it. You won't always succeed, but you got to try. And as I said, meet as many people and work with as many people as you possibly can.
Yeah.
It just, there's so many things that have happened, and I've been so active in this area that I pretty well know who can turn the key.
Yeah.
Who can make whatever needs to happen.
Yeah.
And I don't try to do it. I just go to those people to get things done. I had our bank apparently was one of my friends was had a forged check, and but they weren't offering to give him all his money back, and he was so frustrated. And he told me about it. We were on a plane, and he told me about it. And so when I got home, I just called the general counsel of the bank and said, "This is going on." And that next day, got a call back, and he got his money back. So it's kind of who you know. I had a woman ran a red light and took the front of my car off, and her insurance company was Travelers, And the traveler's adjuster, she had ran the red light. The adjuster called and said, we think this is a 70%, 30% negligence. And I said, you think I'm 30% negligent? And they said, no, we think you're 70% negligent. And I said, she ran the red light. Yeah, but you should have seen her. She was well into the intersection at that time. I didn't argue with him. I just hung up the phone and called the insurance commissioner, who I know very well. And I said, you need to run these guys right out of the state. This is crazy. Well, it wasn't 2 hours before I got a call from that same adjuster saying, we're going to take care of everything, Mr. Hargis. We're going to get you another car. And da, 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 da. Well, if I hadn't known the insurance commissioner, I don't know if that would have happened.
Yeah. Well,
Joe.
Would have been a much longer discussion and battle, I would imagine.
Yeah. So it's just really, really value. There really is a lot to the who you know.
Yeah, and the value of networking is really, really critical. And I think going back to what you said earlier is, if we all just tried to make a positive difference in the lives of others each day, even if we just did one thing, collectively we would move our society to a better place.
Yeah, we had there's a maintenance maid, I don't know what to call it, and she's Spanish, and her son wants to go to college, and she doesn't understand English well enough to really understand what she needs to do or what's going to be involved. I called up to our admissions and I said, have we got anybody that's fluent in Spanish that can talk to this lady? And they said, yeah, sure. But she comes into my office the next day. Oh, thank you so much. It's
just a little thing, right?
A little act of kindness for the day.
Yeah. Well, if we each did that every day, we'd be in a much better place, I think.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. Well, Burns, thank you for being on the Leadership Crucible podcast. It's been an honor and a pleasure to get to know you, and hopefully our paths will continue to cross in the future.
I hope so. Thank you, Randy.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Crucible podcast. If you have a story of adversity you'd like to share, we'd love to hear it. Join us next time as we continue to explore how to live lives of success and significance.